So is obesity an individual or a social issue? Difficult question. Well, frankly, I think it's both and it's neither, but at the same time. But anyway, in order to answer the question as best I can, I have to ask another question first. Do you believe that food is just another consumer good? Because looking at a good part of what modern food is around the world, what we see is what? What we see is intensive agriculture, industrial processing. We see food that is packaged, branded, advertised. We see food that is picked from supermarket shelves. We see food that is bought already cooked, ready to eat. We see food that is picked from food outlets or home delivered. And we see food that presents itself as a consumer's choice, free choice, mine to individually use and dispose of at will. Abundance, we see variety and diversity valued. We see an offer of growing number of options. All these are hailed around us. They're considered positive, modern. So yes, modern food does look like a consumer good. Not all of it, but it does. Point is that it comes with costs attached, and obesity is one. It's interesting to see that the models for public health scientists currently are the hunter-gatherers. The Hadza are very popular, for instance, or the Bushmen. Fact is that there is no obesity or little obesity in hunter-gatherers. And the fact is that people who are fat today might very well have been the ones that would have survived best in a hunting-gathering situation and environment. Why? Because in the hunter-gatherer environment, uncertainty is high, in-group cooperation is high, food is a common good. It is shared with all in the group according to strict collective rules. And the point is that the hunter-gatherers are adapted to their environment, and we are like hunter-gatherers in an environment that is the opposite of the hunter-gatherers environment. Things that are difficult to get or rare, uncommon in the natural environment, are all over us in the modern contemporary environment. And the thing is that hunting-gathering covers 99.99% of human evolution. So, and after hunting-gathering, we have agricultural societies, a blink of an eye in proportion to human evolution, 10,000 years, But whatever. What remains even true in agricultural societies is that there is a sacred dimension to food. And that is where staples are sacralized, wheat, rice, maize, other cereals, etc. And this is this sacred dimension and this social dimension that we are in the process of losing. An illustration of the manners of the hunter-gatherers. This is a report by one American anthropologist, Lorna Marshall, in 1961 about the Kung. I can't do the click sound. The Kung of South Africa, or is it Zimbabwe? Then Rhodesia. Anyway, so she offers her group a taste of some meat, canned meat, and she is struck by the fact, and I quote, "I found it moving to see so much restraint about taking food among people who are all thin and often hungry, for whom food is a source of constant anxiety." Actually, each would take a very modest bite, and the last person often got the most. And she says, "We observe no unmannerly behavior, no cheating, and no encroachment about food." So solidarity, rules, manners. Okay, what has been happening in the long term in the last centuries about food and what is typical of the evolution of food and nutrition in most developed countries. I'm taking the example I know, which is France, and we have good data since at least the 18th century, as on this graph. And what do we see? We see as that in terms of calories, total calories have been climbing until the 1920s. And at this point, they started decreasing. And the same is true for cereals and starches, the staples of the agricultural societies. And they began declining very steeply at approximately the same time. And for instance, in 1900, bread was the staple food in France. The daily consumption per capita was 900 grams. We're down to 1/9 of that. And the last two lines, the red one and the blue one, are animal foods, dairy, meat, and fruit and vegetables. And the blue line is fats and sugars. And come to think of it, this is pretty much a hunter-gatherer's dream come true, when, in the sense that all things that are rare and relished in the environment, the Paleolithic environment, all things that require effort and skills in the environment of adaptedness, the environment to which one is adapted as a hunter-gatherer, all these things come very easily, or to much more easily. The hunter-gatherers love sweets. They don't get them because they don't exist in the environment except a few berries and except honey. And we know the reports are clear. They like honey very much, and they zero in on honey when they can get it. All this comes increasingly easy in the consumer's world. So what we see, what we witness, is actually food evolving from the sacred to the trivial. And this constitutes what some physicians call the obesogenic environment. That is, to the hunter-gatherer physiology, this environment is obesogenic, particularly to certain people who are predisposed, of course, to be more energy savers. And what we have is less energy expenditure. We have more calories available. And all this comes with a passage from sacred to secular in the relationship to food, and a loss of meaning in the sense. And that is what I call the trivialization of food. It is cheap. It is ever present. It is pretty much meaningless. As a matter of fact, you can dispose of it or use it at will and freely, or so it seems. So is obesity an individual or a collective social issue? What makes it apparently social, even to this day, and very much so actually, is the fact that it varies across culture. So it is sensitive to the social environment and the cultural environment. It varies across social classes, and it plays differently for males and females. It is also an individual matter, of course, very much so, because it is the expression of a problem the self has with other people and with society. It involves an anthropological universal dimension, which is giving, sharing, and reciprocity. So a dimension that in urban individualized societies we tend to have forgotten. So how does this play? Well, it plays to the fact that fat is becoming a stigma. It's becoming a stigma, and in the words of the great French nutritionist, Jean Trémolière, society makes the obese and doesn't tolerate them. This is what's happening. So I'd like to look at it, and to start with, let me give you an example. This is a case which comes from the eternal version of the relationship, from the days of the Paleolithic to today. That is, weight equals wealth and power. So it all plays in the sense of how it is used. So this is an example from 1946. The Aga Khan, the leader of one particular group of Muslims, received twice that year, once in Bombay, once in Dar es Salaam, his weight, 243 precious pounds, in diamonds. And this was, as the comment says here, when His Royal Highness completed 60 years of his benevolent leadership as spiritual head, his people celebrated the occasion by weighing him twice against diamonds. He's thanked for his benevolence and spiritual leadership. But this, in turn, is used for charity, that he puts into some charitable funds. So the benevolence and the weight are connected, and everything is nice and balanced, at least in people's minds. So the symbolic of male corpulence is based on sharing, gift, and reciprocity. It involves wealth and power through food production, food redistribution. It is based on big give and take. And for instance, you have the big men in the Pacific Islands that anthropologists have been talking about. And you have the Roman patricians who gave bread and circuses to the plebe that was following them in exchange for their support in political occasions. And body fat, in that case, is seen as proof of a pending debt to the community. It's legitimate if the debt is paid for, if debt and credit are balanced in a way. And this is a perfect illustration of the negative side, by a cartoonist that shows yesterday versus today. Yesterday, starving workers are marching for bread in front of the capitalist with a big belly, a cigar, and a top hat. Now, fat, obese workers are marching for a 3% increase in front of a muscular, exercising entrepreneur. So that's for males, but the system, as it were, works largely in the same way on both sides. But of course, there are big differences. So overall, there are more women around the world. It's a very complicated situation, but by and large, there are more women in the obese population than males in most countries, as this graph shows, with the dots being each a country where women are more numerous than, obese women are more numerous than obese males. Of course, we've seen that what is typical of the female body is that it goes over time through considerable changes imposed upon them by the male glance or by perhaps other factors. These Paleolithic female figures that are found by the hundreds by now make us wonder what exactly are they? Are they Paleolithic porn, as it were? Or are they some kind of deity incarnating fertility or wealth? It's not clear. What is clear is that the changes in the female body shape are spectacular, particularly in the recent period, recent century, let's put it this way. From the hourglass with the corset to the liberation by the French fashion designer in the early 20th century, Paul Poiret, who turned the hourglass into a tube with the flapper. The 1920s fashion, the flapper who's more active, more autonomous, drives, swims, takes a more active part in life. And then again, back to some more hourglass-ish shape. And in the late 1960s, 1968, the British model Twiggy, that is again the tubular Twiggy type of shape, etc. All this is constantly evolving. And if we look at the comparison between models or a beauty pageant like the Miss Universe contest versus actual people, we see on this graph that the Miss Universe contestants are getting thinner and thinner to the point of being pathologically, apparently thin, under 18.5 on the BMI scale, as opposed to American women whose average BMI, body mass index, has been climbing spectacularly, as the diagonal shows. I've been plotting the Miss America contestants or winners from 1920 to the early 21st century. And what you see with the regression graph is that the same slope down is clear until the beginning, the late 1990s, and then it starts going up a little again. And what is going on? What is going on? We can looking at some contestants of the Miss Universe contest over time. For instance, I took two pictures of two candidates from Brazil, one the winner in 1963, one a top contestant in 2017. And of course, you can see the evolution is rather striking and spectacular. Not that on the right side, she looks any heavier than the other side, but it's even more striking with two French examples in this competition. One Miss Universe from 1953 compared to a 2016 candidate. And I think it speaks for itself. There is the most spectacular, in my view, is not so much the weight. It's probably the size of the tallness, but it's also the muscular, tonic aspect of the body. And I think this is very striking. And you could make analyses of the symbolic meaning of all this. But I leave this to maybe other commentators. Now, as we've seen with the cartoons about the working class being now struck by the obesity problem most, here's another illustration with which I find really spectacular, and that is a map of Manhattan, New York. The darker the color, the more expensive the real estate and the higher the income of the households. The bigger the circle and the bigger the BMI, the percent BMI over 30, that is the larger, the more the obesity rate. As you can see, there's an inverse relation. Why are the poor fatter, you may ask? Well, one of the reasons I think has been exposed by my colleague Adam Dronowski for a while, and that's simply the fact that healthier diets cost more. And strangely enough, this hasn't been observed apparently by public health campaigns who have been promoting diets that are lower in calories, but higher in cost per calorie. In other words, if you see on this map, on this graph again, energy density versus energy cost in euros by 1,000 kilocalories, the cheapest are also the most loaded in energy: oil, sugar, desserts, etc. And the ones that are recommended, vegetables, fish, shellfish, etc., are the opposite. One thing that changes from culture to culture, in particular between France and the US, which we've been studying the differences for a long time, is portion size. That's very striking. So Paul Rosen and I sent students on both sides of the Atlantic with precision scales, and we asked them to weigh everything they ate in similar restaurants, in supermarkets, or observe cookbooks restaurant guidebooks, etc. What it boils down to is this. It's always bigger on the US side. Up to, and one exception on this table is the Hard Rock Cafe, for some reason, is slightly smaller, serves slightly smaller sizes on the American side. But it can go up to 72% more on your plate, for instance, in a local Chinese restaurant in similarly populated neighborhoods in Philadelphia and Paris. 72% more on your plate. If you look at this, I mean, a picture I took once on the street in New York, a tradition of premium meat delicacies, you know. My son, who was 12 at the time or so, said, "Dad, look at this huge sandwich. It's amazing." Of course it's huge, and there's a lot of meat in there. At least to French eyes, it looks almost unreal. It probably is, by the way, but it compares to what we get on your plate on in a Paris 3-star restaurant. Of course, the proportion is different. But you can also compare the size of yogurt jars on both sides of the Atlantic. On the left, you have the standard French size, and on the right, the standard American size. So the fundamental difference is that in the US, food is a totally individual matter. In the interviews, they tell us this: it's a matter of choice. I want to choose. It's my body, no one else's body. I want to take the responsibility to have a valuable meal, nutritionally speaking, but I'm guilty. I feel guilty. I trade it off. The trade-off is so easy. It's my own choice, but I trade it off. So the difference with the French is also in meal times. The French have the most uniform meal times and the clearly differentiated meal times. As you can see on the graph, the top 3 spikes are the French: breakfast, lunch, dinner. And the Belgians, so for instance, at 12:30, 50% of the French are busy eating, 40% of the Belgians, 30% of the Hungarians. But in Britain, in the UK, the time of day when you have the most people eating together is 1:10 p.m. There's only 17.5% of the population eating. So it's spread all over the day. And the thing is that this is relevant, as we will see. The French spend a larger percent of the household budget than other countries on food. They have very little snacking. They have the lowest per capita consumption of sodas. They don't drink sweet beverages with meals, or they used not to. Interviews and focus groups show us that what they like is a variety of food, not too much this and that, sugar, salt, fat, etc., but they like conviviality, a good meal together. They think of meal as a ritual every day, same time. And there's almost no snacking except ritualized and social itself. So, as I said, it has to be taken in company. And the fact is, that pediatricians come to like the family meal. Actually, they prescribe it now. I mean, American pediatricians have published a number of papers showing that a couple of meals seated at the table per week together actually reduce the risk of obesity. So eat in family or in group, because eating alone, first of all, it's not done very much in most societies, traditional societies in particular. It's simply stigmatized. But as you can see in this school cafeteria, this child is eating in 8 minutes. He wants to get out. Other children eat together. It takes them 16 to 22 minutes. What it means is that this child is not well. There's something wrong. He's being harassed or something. He wants out. So I wouldn't prescribe eating alone, even if you eat less when you're alone, but you may also eat more frequently and without social control, modeling, and presentation of self. To finish this presentation, which is already too long, I'd like to remark that we live in a nutritional cacophony, and this doesn't make it any easier for people with managing their weight, which they are in charge of in our societies at any rate. An illustration is always interesting from some cartoons. I like these two cartoons. One is representing the situation as a kind of a lottery where you can move the signs and the various wheels. And for instance, today it's going to be, according to a report released today in the news, coffee can cause glaucoma in twins. Or you have the other health bulletin, which says, don't eat eggs, eat more eggs. Tomatoes are good for prostates. Take more vitamins. Vitamins cause cancer. Stay out of the sun. Don't lie around inside. And cut down on stress. Now, the basic consumer, like this advertisement in Vancouver, Canada, they want to know what is in the food they eat and the food they feed their children, because I am what I eat. So people want to be told what to eat, and they want to be told what to eat because they don't know what to eat anymore. And not only they don't know what to eat anymore, but in some cases they don't want to know what they eat anymore, finding out what's in the food they eat. So suspicion prevails increasingly. So the modern food that is a consumer product is like a black box. And the anxious omnivore that we are, the hunter-gatherer in us, wants to know what they eat. I am what I eat. If I am what I eat and I don't know what I eat, how can I know who I am, what's happening to me, to those I feed, etc., and so on? So that's the big, big fear we have. And to help us, public health and nutrition keep telling us, get information, get education, get control of your behavior. And this cartoon shows us a fact of truth, actually, that the more dietary information is provided to us, and the fatter we seem to get. Now, there is some hope, though. There is some hope at the end of this presentation. I see a turning point in public health approach, and it's linked to the consciousness that we get of the stakes at play with the planet, with the ecosystems around us. And this is the conclusion the Lancet published, one of the conclusions last year in their reflection about obesity. Obesity needs to be put into a much wider context. Obesity, they say, is still regarded by some as an individual responsibility resulting from wrong choices and motivations. This view is unacceptable. So it's not the individual's responsibility, or not just that, it's experience as such, but it goes much further. So there is hope in the changes in the perception of obesity by the medical profession. And I think in conclusion, the optimism comes from the fact that now we are growing more and more conscious that we have to change the world in the sense that the planet needs us. Climate change, biodiversity, the environment is now a fundamental dimension in the way we look at things like obesity. And we realize that, paradoxically enough, in some cases it is easier to change the world, perhaps, than it is to change people. Thank you.